Well, I mean, I'm just curious if people have seen, you know, I mean, that people have seen temperature-related releases that are...
But your snowbird examples, you know, everything that we've been shown today were a result of, you know, early season control, it seems.
Yeah. Well, the example I was talking about with the one, you know, where we had the new snow and then temperature hit it and it consolidated into a slab. I mean, that was a case where we'd actually, I don't know if you remember that day, but we'd run routes and we had all these bomb holes there. And then we came back up the hill after the sun came out, and you'd slide your skis onto something because we were going out to open some sign lines. You'd slide your skis out, and the fracture would just propagate out, take out the bomb craters. And, you know, but it was because when we first did our control work in 3% density snow, it's just like floof, 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 you know. And then suddenly that thing had some body, and like I said, my route partner, unawares, headed out on a few places and decided to go surfing.
We're always doing control as it's warming, because we do our control in the morning. It'd be interesting if you went out and started shooting stuff as it got cooler.
Yeah.
My days are good a little bit.
I think a lot of it, you know, I mean, for me personally, when I look at warming and cooling, it's like if you look at all these different avalanches, it seems like you can come back to, you know, do I have a weak layer? Do I have a slab? How recent was the loading? There's all these first order effects, and then there's all this second order stuff that we kind of go, well, maybe it was this, and maybe it was that, maybe it was this. And to me, like the warming, cooling stuff sets down there somewhere. Like it might be an effect, but it's not one of the biggies. Any more comments on this one from anybody? It's a kind of designated clicker. All right. Why do PCRs tend to occur more frequently when the slope is initially open?
Triggers.
You know, I'd have to say my first experience with this was after throwing a 1-pounder out onto a starting zone that was about half as wide as this room was, and nothing happened except it exploded, of course. So I went down to look at the bomb crater on my skis, and it broke about 20 feet above me in a 4-foot fracture line while I was standing there, and this was probably 3 or 4 minutes after the explosion. And that carried me down the hill about 400 feet, which experience really stuck with me. That was at Berthoud Pass, and I was fortunate to be with people that were very reactive to a situation like this, and my fear was more having my head lacerated by them coming into the debris field, which I could see, rather than suffocation. But it was a combination, later as we reconstructed it, of the explosive was really below, sure, it couldn't have taken the whole thing out, but it was below the wind cushion, and it was serious depth floor situation after a heavy wind-generated load, and it was in a February situation. So I take the post-control release stuff really seriously, and but haven't had to deal with it since then. A little bit on the highways, but not bad.
How many have you seen on the highways?
Very few. I saw one that winter. That winter again, that after the highway was shot by CDOT, Department of Transportation, about 6 hours later, the slide, which is the Stanley slide on Berthoud Pass, ran and closed the highway again. Didn't catch anybody. There's no traffic in those days, which really helped. But that was a significant one. And then I haven't seen any other than the situation where the control work was too early in the morning, as far as the warming was concerned, and then with isothermal snowpack, and then later in the afternoons, the avalanches would run. That was on Red Mountain Pass, so I have seen that.
Stanley, I wonder why it keeps doing me.
The other thing I've seen, interestingly, especially when you already talked about earthquakes, and Alaska, we did a control mission. This was late in March on the Seward Highway, and got some results, some avalanches released, and this was with a 105 howitzer. And some avalanches released, many avalanches did not release. But that night, we had a strong earthquake. It was a high 4 or low 5, I can't recall the exact number. It knocked pictures off my wall in Girdwood, I knew that, and that woke me up. The next morning, when the sun came out, everything, virtually every slide path that had not been controlled, and this would be in the backcountry, had released some level of avalanche. The avalanches that we had controlled that had not run did not release. In other words, they still had the bomb craters were up there from the howitzer. You could see them, but they hadn't run. And I really wish I'd documented that a little better at the time. But everything that hadn't been touched released as avalanches, including some of the ski area stuff at Alyeska and Max's.
For Randy, didn't you have a post-control release this year in Motorroom?
In the motor room?
Or above Alpine, or wasn't that?
Oh, Mitchell's.
Mitchell's,
It
I'm
wasn't
sorry.
really a post control release because we had north wind loading, or in, which is, if you're familiar with Bridger, Papa Bear area near Alpine, there's a place called Mitchell's on the north side of Papa Bear that gets loaded by north wind, and it seemed like what we thought was post-control release. I'm trying to remember the sequence. We had some downhill wind the day before, or a few days before, and didn't get much for results on that. Then we had a little more north wind that happened. We had about an 18-inch pillow, and I actually ran that route and skied off the 18 inches of the new snow, and then underneath that there was a downhill wind slab a little bit different, and later in the day the skier went off of that, hit that and broke that out. But it was sort of a, I guess you could say it was a post-control. At least what was odd about it is we'd already taken off a good chunk of the load off that piece, but it still hadn't been taken off enough that somebody hitting it, dropping in from above, kicked it off. Just a small hard slab.
So you ski released the surface stuff?
Yeah,
Okay, so it wasn't shot.
and it had been formed, I can't remember, Pete, that was 2 or 3 days before?
Yeah, 3 days before was the downhill wind again, and
Right.
the northerly going.
After that, so it was like 3 days after. And on that day, I'm sure he got shot with an air shot, probably, Papa Bear.
Papa Bear got shot there,
Yeah.
and the skier looked like the ground came off the head, impacted it
Right.
from a jumped off.
Human air blast.
Yeah. You gotta hit him in the right spot.
Anybody else have any? Yeah.
Well, I think, looking at the question, I think everyone's initial opinion is it's pretty obvious. Get a PCR after you open an area for the first time because you introduce a ton of new triggers, different triggers, people doing things and going places you never thought they'd go all at the same time, and then doing calisthenics on the big rollover that you just picture one person at a time doing. So that's one option, and then I don't necessarily believe, and that's probably the truth. And then there's this other thing I don't necessarily believe, but I think I've probably done a little work on with the shear frames, or at least you guided someone through some work on weak flare, collapse, and then how long it takes for the converter after the flare collapse. It's also true that right before you open a slope, you do your highest magnitude and frequency of explosives work. And you use explosives to affect the snowpack, and in theory test it, in theory affect the snowpack, and by affecting it, we could also be weakening the snowpack temporarily, perhaps. I'm not sure if the research has gone any further than that initial initial study, and I know in our operational setting at Big Sky, I think Scotty at least started this when you were doing some of your work, and when we use particularly big shots on a slope, we'll have a 24-hour waiting period before we open it to skier triggers, and that's it's kind of a relative shot magnitude per slope. You know, some slopes it could be a 9 or 10 pounder, some slopes it could be a 25 pounder, some slopes, the smallest slope could be a 6 pounder or so. And with the assumption that we could, in theory, be weakening the snowpack with these explosives, and then given it some sintering time, and then regaining strength, hopefully it's stronger than it ever was. So that's just sort of the other side, is maybe we're just weakening the snowpack a little bit too much right off the bat, and then open it to people.
I think that's an open question. We don't know. I mean, the measurements that we made suggested that, we were pulling shear frames, so they were suggesting that at least the shear strength, like if you could get that a fracture to occur, then your shear strength was less. But then that shear strength increased over time. And at least in our case, it increased to about the original strength in about 24 hours with one case. In another case, it increased to that original strength within a couple hours. But originally, it ends up being weaker than it was before in shear. Now, whether or not it's going to produce an avalanche is kind of a different thing, because if we start thinking of things in terms of anti-crack model, and you need that intact slab and some weak layer to collapse into beneath it, and we collapse that weak layer to try and get it to collapse again, to repropagate that fracture might be more difficult. But to err on the side of caution, the idea of throwing a bunch of explosives at it and then giving yourself 24 hours is not a bad thing.
It will definitely be strong
Yeah.
after 24 hours.
Yeah. After 48, it'll be even better, unless it's no
2 weeks. I think a potentially simple answer to the first part of this question is we almost always have weak layers in southwest Montana, and we're almost always waiting for enough depth to open slopes so people aren't bouncing off rocks and logs and whatnot. So it's almost always that we're opening new terrain after a loading event. And yeah, we shoot the shit out of it, but if we don't get it just right or whatever. So I think the simple answer is we always open right after a load. Well, not always, but quite often. I mean, think about it.
Anybody else want to add anything? Let's see.
I really apologize, I have a 5 o'clock meeting I gotta go to.
Just when the questions get hard.
You have to answer that question. Ski compaction does help if you can start from the beginning. That's all you can do. I don't think anybody would argue that, if you can affect the weak layer. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks, Ray.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of covered this, I think.
Yeah, we kind of discussed it earlier about the different ideas
Yeah.
on introducing the more heterogeneous slab or variability.
Yeah.
So it probably does something, but who knows?
I think that main thing is, it's not gonna, just like with the saddle feed field, it's not gonna eliminate your close control release or your chance of avalanching if you're not affecting the weak layer. It's just like, you got to.
Our 2 big slabs this year at Big Sky are 2 of our big slabs. They were ski affected every day. They were open, and the slabs got skied in, and they still have it.
But the weak layer wasn't skied in. Yeah.
Never touched it.
What was that weak layer? It was basal facets or on crest?
Yeah, it's on crest. Advanced, too. They were pretty big for as warm as our season was this year. It was pretty epic.
And that's something that's so hard to explain to the public. I mean, after that Saddle Peak avalanche, you know, Randy had public in his office screaming at him that if Bridger had that thing open a couple days before and they'd been able to ski it, that wouldn't happen.
That's dumb.
That's the public. Like, that's exactly.
Go first, man. Go ahead.
Anybody want to comment on this anymore? Should we move to the next one? All right.
What stability propagation tests or tests do you feel do or does the best job predicting the potential for PCRs and/or surprise avalanches?
I won't answer what stability test, but I think it's more what's the nature of your snowpack, and when it seems, at least anecdotally, we won't know until you guys send all your info into Karl, but it seems anecdotally that most post-control releases occur early in the season when there's, you know, greatest spatial variability, or during low snow years when there's a lot of spatial variability. And I think, you know, coming from Sun Valley, which you know, relies on snow from hoses, how did that ad go? Hoses, or snow from hoses rather than Evan. When we finally get snow there, typically they are surprised constantly that the ski patrol there, because you've got these ribbons of really stable snow that were you know, machine made, and then basically this backcountry unstable faceted layers off piece, you know, but within the ski area. And Sun Valley, surprisingly, I think, has probably had more complete burials in the past 10 years than any other ski area in the country. They've had 4, including 1 fatality. And so my view of it is depends on what your snowpack is like. Is that valid?
Yeah. I don't think, I mean, I don't think any one test is going to tell you whether or not we're going to get post-control releases. There's more. What's that?
So that's why they're a surprise.
Yeah, there you go.
Test them.
I mean, probably your best test is going to be explosives. It almost always is, right? Trying to create avalanches.
ECT, CT,
TN2, there you go. Any other comments from folks?
Clicking, it's
Okay, here we go. Beer's waiting for us.
Yeah.
All right. For 90% of avalanche victims, these bases are in the lab. What concepts from today's seminar might be appropriate for the other 10%?
Is that supposed to be for backcountry students or pros or both?
It's a good question. Doug, Mark? How would we frame this question? I'd say either or both.
I mean, there's a lot of people in this room that do avalanche education. What sorts of things from today could you transfer that would help people out? You want
Or
to
you know the last year.
There you go.
It's all about the slab.
It's all about
Oh, I think never stop, like, you know, the message to the backcountry users, never stop collecting data. Pay attention to temperature changes during the day and those sorts of things. You know, you guys are talking about the warming, and you know, if you know you got a layer in there and you're starting to get the warming, I know all your guys' radar's gonna be up. If you know there's a layer in there, we get significant temperature change.
Well, there's also tolerance for uncertainty. I mean, it's always the dilemma. Do you scare people with uncertainty, or do you introduce the concept of uncertainty and allow them to make their own decisions? And the degree of uncertainty is really an individual's choice as to how much they'll tolerate. But I think a lot of it, especially in a ski area situation and in a community situation, has a lot to do with peer pressure. And if you have peer pressure that diminishes your or increases your tolerance for uncertainty, in other words, you're willing to take a higher degree of risk, then you really have an educational challenge ahead of you. Avoidance is probably the other 10%.
Mike, one of the things you can take out to people is that, I mean, even slopes that there's this huge chunk that we don't know about. Even slopes that we do all this avalanche control work that professionals are looking at, we can still have situations where we get 2 inches of snow in natural lumps, and then another thing too, just about skier compaction, because gosh, you hear about that so much. We skied it, our line, we made our line safe. Well,
I think I don't know, if there's one thing you could try and teach people, or it's really hard to teach people, is just that it's so complicated. I mean, that's what makes up that last little piece, I mean, because you can do your ECTs right, you can know whether you're an avalanche trained, you can have all these, you can do a level 1, level 2, level 3, but there's always that piece that it's just so hard and complicated, and it catches professionals by surprise, it catches me by surprise, you have near misses, you blow it every now and then, you lose sleep at night, and it's hard to convey that to people, that it's not like if you read a book or there's a test that's going to give you the answer, or it's that extra piece that it's really complicated, I think is hard for people to understand.
Yeah, and I think that was conveyed really effectively today, because so many avalanches we talked about, and everyone said, I don't know. Could have been this, could have been that. I mean, what are you going to say about some of these things? Yeah.
I'm just wondering what you guys, in going back to maybe a ski area, maybe 99% of your control days are fairly normal, everything works perfectly, and whether it's a year or a whole career, it's going to be those, like we've seen, those like 25-year returnable events. Like, how do you guys think it seems like to identify those days or those control mornings can be difficult at the moment to say, whoa, this is a weird event. I mean, is that the sort of thing where you have to say, I'll know it when I see it? You might see one just a couple times in your career, but you gotta be heads up.
I think there's ways to flag them. I mean, I think that could be helpful. I mean, one thing is, we all go to the hill, we work, we have, we work there for a long period of time, and you set kind of this memory of stuff that goes on, and eventually you leave, someone else shows up, and everyone's got this, this kind of malleable memory. But, if we can get all those data into a computer and get them to the point where, every day when you show up, plugs out and gives you an idea of just how unusual that day is. Oh, we got 20 inches of snow. Well, how often do we get 20 inches of snow here? That's only happened 3 times in the last 20 years. And we've had 20 inches of snow, or it's happened, or it happens 4 times a season. But if you have good records and you get them into a computer and get them searchable some way, that I think that can start to at least clue you into, wow, today could be unusual. Of course, today might be unusual and not have anything to do with the new snow. It might have to do with the wind, or the combination of the wind and the new snow, or the fact that, this was a warming day associated with really dense snow, or, but it might give you a little guidance.
you know, in a highway situation, we're always looking at adjacent avalanche tracks that are not subjected to control work. And so we have a controlled environment and an uncontrolled environment that we can observe. And looking at the uncontrolled environment gives a good clue about the controlled environment. But this may or may not work with ski area situations, but it certainly is another tool with a highway situation.
Just to answer Mark's a little bit, just from my limited experience, that if there is one thing that stands out, it's significant remote triggering. It has been associated with weird shit at some point in that cycle or around there. All that, whether it was the Liberty Bowl year, the guy getting buried in Kranji, or just odd things. I've seen odd things happen in years when you are getting good remote triggering from hundreds of feet away, or triggering 5 paths with no tensile cracks with one shot, stuff like that. But it's based on such a limited data set.
This is sort of oblique, I guess, to the question, but I think that the ski industry is one of the few industries, when you're talking about pros, where we deal with safety issues ourselves, and basically it's ski patrollers that do it, and rarely does it, there are exceptions, but most of it is sort of grassroots. It's the people that are out there doing the work. And one thing that's happening is there have been enough accidents, workplace accidents, the past few years that OSHA is starting to get interested in what's going on with the ski industry and ski patrollers, and whether that's going to change culture or not, and whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing, who knows? But I do know in the Forest Service, as far as fire goes, we have some very highly paid people that spend a lot of time figuring out how to keep our fire crews alive, or at least reduce the risk to them. So,
I think one thing that sometimes isn't recognized is just how dangerous the snow work can be. And Jameson did a study for the Canadians, and he basically showed that we like to think, oh yeah, we're pretty safe and stuff, but in terms of their accident rate, their fatality rate for their avalanche professionals in Canada, it's really high. Like you're up in the same level as dangerous mining and other operations. So we like to be like, oh, we're just out here playing in the snow, but it's important stuff, like all those things Scotty was talking about.
I think we should probably talk about this in a little bit, but then you need to probably get into your wrap-up, Karl.
Sure. So we'll just throw this last one out, but I want to know what you guys think. Do you think proper shot placement can eliminate more than 50% of post control release?
Well, the multiple shot placements, if there's any doubt.
One thing that I thought was interesting, because Scotty's looked at a bunch of accidents, and one of his comments to me was that he thought it was fairly rare to see situations where there were post-control release avalanches and the controller had been an air blast. Not sure it's impossible, but
I think you can reduce quite a few of them with good shot placements. That stuff from the bowl that you had in the 80s, Scotty, I was talking to Jans about those, and he wasn't really considering them too much post-control because he was thinking they never even shot where it's instability, they just plumb missed.
Right.
And I think that, yeah, you could miss.
yeah. Well, and that's the key thing, right? Yeah, if you put the explosive
that goes back to what Doug was saying, you gotta know your snowpack. If it's a particularly hard slab, you might wanna go lower, or, and, you know, obviously points are on the flanks, or somewhere where the slab's thinner, or if it's different properties of the snowpack might be different. I don't know, I don't do any explosives work, but I don't know, I'm assuming you guys can think about that, so.
I think it'll be really interesting to see when you get more data. The air blast question, I think, is really big in my mind. My hunch is that there's something going on with shots on the surface or the snow that's making them less effective at releasing avalanches than air blast, more than just the reduced pressure wave.
Eric, do you know with the because when you were showing that example from the 80s, I think it was the one from the 80s. Weren't those guys were doing? They did some boo shots, I think you said.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably did some boo. I'm imagining that they did some boo shots across that slope before they opened it too.
That's what Jimmy said.
Yeah.
He said they blasted the hell out of it.
I remember Liam said they just did pass after pass after pass on that thing.
Yeah.
Until, because the management kept saying, we want you to open it, and Liam was like, yeah, I want to do another pass. And so he did another pass, and then they're like, now are you going to open it? He's like, well, maybe we'll do another pass. And it kind of went that way for the whole day, and then the next day they're like, now it's time to open it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, so
If you look at your question here, and you already said it, if you knew what the proper placement was, obviously you would reduce the probability of post-control releases. So something that an air blast does, not only does it give you enhanced pressure, it gives you a little bigger range, increases your probability that you're going to find that critical crack length for that loading.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's probability thing. Can I do one air blast and cover the same area? Now, this is hypothetical. I'm not saying this is the right number, but I can do a 3-surface blast or something like that. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
you're increasing your probability of finding that proper shot placement by doing that.
Yeah.
Well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, if you want to start talking OSHA, now you're going to talk about people walking out into a path that they think is an avalanche. Put a stick of glue with a shot on it. And then you got to turn around and walk back. And that's one of those funny things that gets done and doesn't get looked into too much.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the tree.
I would be better if NSA does it.
So we need to find we need to design throw it out there.
But I think you can look at it, on a probability standpoint, sometimes it doesn't matter how many shots you put out there. Sometimes you might miss that probability dead zone and thousands of skiers will find it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at these things and you say, well, 200 people skied down there. 200 first skier, got it,
Yeah.
Guy to go buy a lottery ticket, I guess. Capital like he touched.
I wonder if it just happened, does it happen all at once, or is there just a slow thing that's happening and then it finally goes, or?
Yeah, we don't know. All right.
I think we have one last, Carl's going to do a little bit of a kind of 5-minute wrap up here, but thanks to Doug and Don and Randy.
So, Scott just at the last workshop that we did a year ago on wet snow, Scotty asked me just at the end of the day to say, kind of wrap up the day in terms of what do we know, what don't we know, and where do we go? And really brief, because I think we covered everything pretty effectively today. I mean, what do we know? Well, I mean, I think what we're seeing and what we're finding over the past couple of decades is that we're having an improved understanding of what's going on in terms of fracture mechanics in the snowpack. I think we've made some real advances there in terms of what we're understanding. I think we're making some advances now, Dan is, in terms of the effect of explosives on snowpack. And we've learned in the last 20 years a lot more about spatial variability. Before before it seemed really mysterious when these things happen, and now it's more like, well, yeah, we just might not have hit the right spot. We've learned a lot about different snowpack tests. I think those have given us some clue to that spatial variability. They've given us some clues to those fracture mechanics. But it comes around more in my mind to what we don't know. And there's so much that we don't know. I mean, just like what Mike was saying, well, what's going on? I mean, these 200 people ski it. Did that last person hit the right spot? Is there some sort of progressive failure going on underneath that slab that might affect things? I mean, we don't really know. We don't know, we don't have a perfect model for fracture mechanics at this point. I mean, we have sort of a continuum. The fracture mechanical model, this anti-crack model, actually includes McClung's model, so it builds off of McClung's work. And, when Ed was talking about, well, it's not really taking into account this weak layer, and it's calling it rigid and everything else, I mean, there's obviously probably improvements to be made there. We don't really, despite the fact that we've done 20 years, or 25 years of spatial variability research, we still can't tell you where to place your explosive. I mean, we have beat to death slope after slope after slope, but we still can't tell you. This is where we can tell you how variable it is, right? But we still can't tell you why or how much. Recently we did some work where we took all the spatial variability data sets that I had, and we, with Jordi and another person down in New Zealand, we ran them through all these simulations to try and figure out what sorts of spatial patterns we have with all these different data sets. And really sort of, we're looking at the correlation length. So we're trying to look at how closely related adjacent snow pits are, or adjacent tests. And what we found was that it entirely depended on the day, it depended on the test, it depended on the snowpack, it depended on all this mixture of things, and we couldn't ever piece together, oh, well, under these conditions expect this, or under that conditions expect that. I mean, you come back to Perla's rule of thumb, which is that there is no rule of thumb. Despite Dan's work, we're trying to get to the point where not only are we trying to figure out where to place the explosives, but how do we optimize that explosive? Is there an explosive that's optimal in terms of maybe its detonation speed, the size, the placement, off the snow, on the snow, and I think the stuff that Dan's doing is going to help maybe shed some light on that. So where do we go from here? Well, one of the things that I've approached all the skiers around here about is to try and put together. It's actually pretty amazing with this stuff. I mean, we're sitting here all batting all these ideas around, and yet, so it seems like a bunch of work should be going on in these areas, and we should have done a lot of research in it, but we haven't. I mean, the last person to really do explosives research did it back in the late 70s. And now, here, 2010, we're starting to work on it again, as a community. And it seems like there should be some database of all these different post-control events that we've talked about. Shouldn't there? And we don't have that, I mean, it's all just sort of where you hear about them is, Liam sets you down and shows you a picture and goes, oh my God, like you should have seen back in that, holy cow, what an avalanche, or you come to a seminar like this and we hear about that too, or these things. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is myself and Doug and with the assistance of folks like Scotty and really everyone in this room, we're trying to start to collect data on post-control releases. And it's a tough thing because no one really wants to spend the time to go back and dig through all their data. But we're just starting to get a few areas. Big Sky sent us some preliminary stuff, and we're going to start to approach. I was hoping to talk to Jimmy when he was here, but we're going to approach the folks in Utah and Jackson and California and every place and try and get a data set together so that we can say, we've had this many post-control releases, and of those, this percentage is running on, persistent weak layers. The average slab depths for these things is this. the average slab hardness is this, you know, and on and on and on, just to characterize these things better. Because I think we have a general idea, but we really don't have the data. I think really with this stuff, we just need to keep after it. You know, we need to somehow combine kind of the imperfect science that we're doing with the imperfect practice that everyone's out there is doing, and you know, I think as an industry, as a group, we're doing a pretty good job, and we still have these outlier events. And how many of those outlier events are we still going to have 10, 20 years from now? I don't know, but hopefully, you know, as we continue to work on some of this together, we'll knock a few of those things out. But other than that, let's see, I don't really have much else. Does anybody else have anything to add? Sort of, I mean, I'm still struck by how much we don't know. And I think what we've talked about today in this room really brings that into focus. I mean, I sit there and it seems like for the last 20 years I've done, you know, nothing but think about Avalanches, read papers and going to conferences and yada, yada, yada. And yet, you know, Eric can stand up here and go, well, geez, you know, look at this thing under GAD too. Like, what do you think about that? Like, what caused that? I don't have a clue, you know? Or you know, or Abro stands up here and says, yeah, we had 100 people skied this the day before, and then the helicopter landed the next morning with no new snow, and the entire slope rips out. So what about that? I don't know, you know? Or you get 2 inches of snow in the surf runs, or whatever. You know? So I think it's just good to understand that we don't know. And it's okay not to know, just need to give yourself wider safety margins, which is one of the things that I've talked about with Mike already. Yeah.
But sometimes it does happen just like we expect. We dig the pits, we look at the weak layers, we say, oh shit, we're going to get this to come down, and down it comes.
Yep. And that actually happens a lot more frequently than
Right. Well, we just blow it off as standard operating procedure.
Yep. Yep. Anybody else want to add anything? I guess I'd just close with another thank you both to the Friends of the Avalanche Center, and especially Scotty for putting this thing together.
Two quick things. If you guys can spend a few minutes to fill this out, if you don't want to do it here, we are going to go over to the Ale Works. A lot of folks are and have a beverage, something to eat, something along those lines. So you feel free to fill it out over there and hand it to me over there if you want. Also, we do need to clean up all our trash in here because we get charged and banned from using the room again if we leave it messy. So we got to kind of clean up. So when you're done filling it out, or you can clean up now, and then hopefully we'll see a bunch of folks over there at the Ale Works. And thanks again for coming. We won't do these things if you don't come, and this is good. It's awesome to see so many people.
And there's a separate note, as of today, there's a brand new version of Snow Pilot, which just got released, which is new symbols and all that stuff. So if you're a Snow Pilot user, make sure you just download it. And you're good to go. Thank you.